want to start this morning by telling you a little story. It's about a boy who met a girl when they were both teenagers. They fell in love. And they were both from working class families. And despite being pretty smart, they both left school at an early age with not many qualifications. So they were working pretty low-paying jobs to make ends meet. They got married. They bought a little house on a big mortgage, and they started a family. And a few years into their marriage, they met Jesus again and came back to a faith that they'd held as children, and it radically changed their lives. Just a few years later, after following him for some time, they felt like he was calling them into full-time ministry, to give up their jobs and do something purely for him. But how do you go from factory work to the mission field? And how do you study theology when you didn't study A-levels? All they had was a simple conviction that when God calls you, he'll also provide. And somehow they knew that he would. From the days when they finished work to go to Bible college, and for the next 30 years, they didn't receive a salary. They lived off the gifts of God's people. And each one of those gifts was lovingly noted in a hardback notebook. They recount many times when money was tight and there wasn't much in the cupboards, but when something was needed, so often an envelope would come through the door with just the right amount of money. They raised 3 kids, sending them all to university. They managed some family holidays. They went without at times, but in the grand scheme of things, they lacked very little. And their approach constantly with money was, if it's in your power to do good, you've got some money in your pocket, then do good with it. This couple are my parents. And this is already a bit emotional, but this morning, just as we were about to start the service, my dad walked in. So I'm feeling even more emotional than normal. So you don't even need his photo, he's sitting over there. This is how I grew up. That book of gifts has just a few pages left. And in a few months' time, my mum and dad retire from 36 years of reaching children with the gospel across Ireland. Our experiences with money shape us. It shaped me. It continues to shape me. This morning, we're launching into a 3-part series intentionally positioned at the start of 2025 on giving, financial giving. 90% of the running costs of this church, so that's the staffing, the buildings, the equipment, everything needed for ministry, comes from the congregation. So it's not really a subject that we can't talk about. It would be lovely if we could put it in a box and not talk about it. We can't. We have to. Plus, the Bible has an awful lot to say about money, and Jesus spoke about it a lot. So in our spiritual formation, we want to take the words of Jesus really seriously, so it must be pretty important. If you were here when we talked about our new church cultures, we're using the acronym WASHED, and the S in WASHED stands for spiritually generous. We want to foster a culture in this church of generosity, not out of duty or responsibility or guilt, but because we've been transformed, we've been washed by Jesus, and that makes a difference to the way we spend our money. We can be and we should be generous with our time, our homes, our gifts, our affections. Those are all great, but the Bible particularly talks about our treasure, the things that we own. This morning I'm speaking about the love of money, because where our treasure lies reveals something about what we care about, what we love. I'm going to ask you at the outset to do 2 things this morning. I'm going to ask you to have a growth mentality. This was a new phrase for me, but my daughter came home from school one day and said, "Hey, Mummy, which of these 2 phrases reveals a growth mentality?" Money is a touchy subject for me. Money has been a touchy subject for me. It's really subtle, isn't it? But can you spot where the growth mentality is? Whatever your experience of money, finances, church teaching on giving, We want to come to the Lord this morning, come to the Bible, come to church with a growth mentality, willing to be changed and challenged by what God says. And secondly, I'm going to ask for your grace this morning as we discuss this topic together, because it can be sticky and hard. Money is not always easy to talk about. We're a really diverse congregation here in Peckham, and it's a quality that makes us more beautiful and special than if we were all the same. It's a good thing. Some of us earn a lot of money. Some of us come from families where there's always been plenty of money. Some of us are not earning money right now, or living in debt, or struggling with the just needing to make ends meet from day to day. There'll be things that I say this morning that reveal areas of privilege in my life. You might think that's easy for you to say, Julie, but if you were in my circumstances looking at my bank balance, you wouldn't say that. And I've tried to be really aware of that this morning as I've planned, but would you forgive me if I trip up and I make you feel uncomfortable? I still believe that God has something to say to all of us, no matter what bank balance we're looking at. And we're all part of this family here in church, called to invest in God's kingdom in Peckham. So let me ask you, start with a touchy subject, a tricky question. Do you love God or money? And Jesus clearly put it in the passage that we read in Matthew 6. Either you'll hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You can't have it both ways. I want to use a reference here, and I'm a little nervous that it might only connect with a certain part of the population, but bear with me. Did anyone ever do a quiz a little bit like this? I'm hoping it's going to come up. Thanks, JJ. For those of you who can't see this quiz, it's from a teen magazine, and it promises to help me find my soulmate through a series of questions. If I was, into 90s, noughties, heartthrobs. Apparently, according to these questions, my soulmate is Joshua Jackson from Dawson's Creek, so I'm really sorry, John. What would the questions be that help to reveal our hearts when it comes to God or money? I'm going to ask you some. I'm not expecting you to answer out loud. Don't panic. But have a think of what your answer might be. Question 1. As you leave a shop, you realize that the shop assistant has given you more change than you were due. What do? Do you A, think to yourself, excellent, that worked out well? B, wrestle with it for a moment, but on reflection, there's a long queue now, you're in a hurry, it's only a few quid, you think, I'll try to give it to charity. Or C, you go straight back. It's not your money, it could cause the shop assistant problems later, and honesty and truth really matter. A, B, or C. Question 2, you've been unhappy in your job for a while now, feeling unsatisfied and exhausted. A couple of times people have asked you, why don't you leave the role and find something new? And you're beginning to think, maybe that's God speaking to you through others. What do? A, push on. Who likes their job anyway? It's all about the paycheck. B, you look around at jobs in other sectors and become more and more unhappy with what you're doing, but it feels like too big a risk to take. C, you ask some friends to pray with you and help discern God's plan. You know if he's in it, then he will provide for you. And finally, question 3, a request comes out in the church newsletter. Not being pointed here, I do write the church newsletter, but this isn't me trying to get at you. Asking for financial help for a special event. Do you? A, assume it's not directed at you. There are other people in church who have more money than you, and they should be the ones to give. B, remember you had some extra pay last month, so because that was a bit above normal, you could probably give a little. Or C, you ask God how much you could give. You consider what you could do without this month in order to invest in something you believe is of eternal worth. A, B, and C. In the 90s, in these teen quizzes, not that I did that many of them, you'd be asked to tot up whether you replied mostly A's, mostly B's, or mostly C's, and it would reveal where your affections lie. I think probably we can all see where the answers should be, where our hearts should be. But the trouble is that we live in a culture today that loves money. It's devoted to making money, keeping money, spending money, living, breathing money. And it's really obvious in some places, and in others it's incredibly subtle. The word that Jesus used in Matthew 6 when he talks about money is mammon, and it was actually bigger than money. There's an image, Jojo, if you can stick it up. Mammon was often personified as a demon or a god by medieval writers. And this makes sense. There's a lure of money, and it can wield like a power over us. It's vying for a love and affection. And this picture by artist Evelyn de Morgan features a massive statue holding out a bag of money and a woman clutching desperately at its knees, looking up yearningly into its face, which stares down at her without any feeling. When you love someone or something, the object of that love has an impact on you. I want to offer 3 ways I think it has an impact on us. It gets our attention and our focus, our eyes. When you love someone, you wake up thinking of them. You daydream about them. You try to spend as much time as you can with them. It drives our decision making. The major decisions of our life are driven by our affections, where we live, what we do, what direction to turn at critical moments. What we love matters in those moments. And it shapes our character. We're changed and affected by the object of our love. St. Clare of Assisi wrote, "We become what we love, and who we love shapes what we become." It matters. But 3 big problems with making money the object of our affection, and they're really simple and outlined in Matthew 6 that we read. Money doesn't last. It talks about moths and vermin and thieves. There's things on that list that I really don't like. Really don't like vermin. Really don't like moths. John knows all about that when he has to get rid of moths in the summer. These things steal and destroy. Our money won't last. It will be taken. It doesn't satisfy us. We've quoted a couple of times recently, but it was in our Alpha talk, the first night of Alpha, that Jim Carrey, the actor Jim Carrey, very successful actor, he said, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they'd ever dreamed of so that they can see it's not the answer. And it's never enough." The book of Ecclesiastes in the middle of the Bible, this old wisdom book, there's a saying in there that has just an insane relevance to our culture today. It could be written this week. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? It doesn't last, it doesn't satisfy, and it's never enough. Jesus is so clear when he says you can't love God and money. They're incompatible with one another. And yet here we are in 2025 in a money-obsessed culture, and we're trying to love God. It's true at our very deepest levels. We want to love him. We're trying to function in a society where money is king, but we're trying to live counterculturally to that. Sometimes winning, I don't know about you, sometimes failing. I think it could be useful for us just to think about some of the ways in which we might be able to see where our affections are lying. What do our lives look like when money is the object of our love? And what do they look like when it's God on the throne instead? And hopefully it'll throw up some things that we can watch out for to keep our hearts in check, to keep pulling our hearts back to our first love, back to the Lord. So our attention and our focus. When money's the object of our love, I think we're more prone to greed, to envy, to jealousy, to coveting. We're attracted to all that glitters and shines, always wanting more, never satisfied. Guys, advertising and influencers, they know this. They're trying to pull our attention in. We need to acknowledge the messages behind the things that we see out there. It's trying to get our attention and our focus. But when God gets our attention and our focus, that changes our lives. Simon Ponsonby, we were talking about this as a staff team this week. Simon Ponsonby is a vicar in Oxford, and he described the period of time where he and his wife were dating but living apart. And it was back in the days, they were writing love letters to one another. And he describes how he would pore over her letters. He'd read them again and again. He'd hold them to try and smell it, like pick up her scent on the letters. He knew them off by heart by the time he got the next one. Our Bibles, they're a love letter from our Heavenly Father. He deserves our attention. Oh, sorry. Wasn't a very good example of treating the love letter well, sorry. He deserves our attention and our focus, and he longs for our time. And when we spend our time resting in him, he gives us fresh perspective for the world around us. When we spend time worshiping him, loving on him, we see things with kingdom vision. It changes our attention and our focus. What about our decision making? When money drives our decision making? Just a little while ago, I was home during the daytime, and I'm not often home during the daytime, but John and I had the telly on, and I couldn't believe the amount of ads that were on the TV in the daytime for funeral costs. Have you seen these? And the messaging behind them, I was really struck by it. They were really there to make you feel guilty. Your family shouldn't have to deal with the cost of you when you're gone. Invest now into these costs. There are some, I'm not dissing sensible practices around saving and preparing for the future, but I think it can get really mixed in with storing up our treasures on earth. And Jesus told us really clearly we're not meant to do that. And we talked, one of my questions was about jobs. How many people do you know in London who are unsatisfied and exhausted by their jobs? They're so tired. Is that not the most common response when you ask any Londoner how they are? How are you doing? I'm so tired. I don't want to be naive to the cost of living in this absurdly expensive city, even in this area of Peckham. And so I don't say it lightly, but how are some of our decisions around what we do purely driven by money and the fear of not having enough? When God drives our decision making, when we surrender that to him, having money isn't wrong. Investing and stewarding money well is something Jesus talks about a number of times in parables. He gives us good advice. And I read an old article on the Forbes website about Peter Grandich, a stockbroker, successful stockbroker, presumably a man with a lot of money. And he said, I get my financial guidance from the Bible. It's a super practical book with tips around debt and giving and what to avoid around money. And if we're reading it, if we're spending time in our Bibles, it's going to really influence our decision making. We're going to put it into practice and make good decisions. I was just reading the start of the year, the book of Job, and it's pretty hard going, but there's a bit right in the middle where Job's in the worst of his suffering, where he says, if I put my trust in gold or said to pure gold, you're my security, I would have been unfaithful to God on high. He knew that trusting and building his security on gold was like cheating on God, like being unfaithful to him. God gets to be in the driving seat when we belong to him. And you might be wrestling with some big decisions around your work life and your income right now. I just urge you to work those through with the Lord. He really cares about this stuff. He cares about what you do and about how you're provided for. And let his voice be stronger than the financial ones, the ones that are just focused on money. And we'd be really happy to stand with you in prayer ministry this morning as you wrestle with these things. And finally, when money shapes our character, what does that look like? Paul gave Timothy a really stark warning in 1 Timothy 6. It's a famous verse that you've probably heard. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. I said earlier, what we love shapes the people we become. And God warns us what the outcome is in building our foundation on money. And even in our secular stories, there's many cautionary tales of an inward-focused, money-driven life. Think of Ebenezer Scrooge in Dickens' A Christmas Carol, or The Wolf of Wall Street, what money can do to our character. when we give that over to God, Paul continues in 1 Timothy 6:11, you, man of God, flee from this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. Flee from, run from, turn the other way to all the good gifts of the fruit and the good fruit of the Spirit, allowing God to shape and form us. And of course, we have an ultimate role model in this, Jesus. He knew that time with his Father, time spent with the Father, was fuel for his mission. That fasting, we've been talking about fasting again this morning, fasting and going without gave him freedom from the ties of the world that would hold him back. God is a worthy recipient of our love and affection where money isn't. Where money doesn't last, God does. And it says in Matthew 6, as we read this morning, verse 20, things done for him are stored up in heaven. They matter. Money doesn't satisfy, but God does. Verse 33, seek first his kingdom, and all you need will be added to you. Money is never enough, but he is. He gives us peace, joy, contentment, enough. Your Heavenly Father knows what you need. He knows our needs. We have more than enough in him. Church, we're called to stick out, to stand out, to look different. Remember that goal that we've been talking about in our vision statement. We are chasing radical holiness. And it's meant to affect our whole lives. This stuff is where the rubber hits the road. It's great to pursue radical holiness when we're feeling like this in church. But when it comes to living this out day by day and looking at where our money's going, it requires a bit of a fight. It requires some training. If we just go with the flow in our culture, that's where we're going. It requires an upstream fight to fight against it. It's going to require some effort. And so I want to finish off today very quickly by outlining 8 top tips for fighting this. I'm going to fly through these. Number 1, budget, plan, save, flee debt. This is your money management. Money management matters. We work with Christians Against Poverty. They're one of our partners here. Rachel is our CAP Centre debt manager. Sonia's just come on as a debt coach. So we've grown the centre recently, which is brilliant. And the work that CAP do is fantastic, phenomenal. The CAP Money course, which we hope to do again sometime this year, will teach you how to budget and plan and save. And that's also included in the CAP Life Skills course, which is going to come up again this year. If you're in debt this morning, or if you're struggling to work out how to manage your money, talk to our CAP team. They'd really love to point you in the right direction, because that's where it starts. We start by getting to the point where we're managing our money well. Number 2, give. Give secretly, give sacrificially. The broader chapter of Matthew 6 has some really great wisdom on this. We didn't read all of it this morning because it's long, but go back and have a look. Verse 3 and 4, when, not if. We talked about when you're fasting, not if you're fasting. This is when you're giving, not if you're giving. When you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing, so your giving may be in secret, but your Father sees it, and he will reward you. I read somewhere there's no greater antidote to greed than the regular practice of disciplined generosity. Stops us getting greedy. Number 3, trust Jehovah Jireh. Verse 8 in Matthew 6 says, don't be like them, because your Father knows what you need. Jehovah Jireh translates, God will provide. He loves you. He loves you more than the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, and he's a good Father, and he knows how to take care of his children. Trust his hand of provision. Number 4, don't hoard. Verse 19 says, don't store up for yourself treasures on earth. Don't have more than you need. I heard some really frightening statistics about the fast fashion industry. And I'm speaking to myself here because this is one of my weaknesses. Over 100 billion items of clothing are made every year. That's twice as many as about 20 years ago. Do we need twice as many clothes now as we did 20 years ago? I don't think so. Over 90 million tons of it ends up in landfill. We're making stuff that's literally just being shipped off to landfill. And you've probably heard this before, but the world produces enough food for everyone, and yet 733 million people go hungry every year. As people living in God's kingdom, can we be fighting a culture that stores up more and more treasures on earth? Number 5, attitude of gratitude. Verse 22 says, if your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. Your perspective and the way you see the world matters. One of the best writers, I think, on gratitude is a woman called Anne Voskamp. I really like her writing. She went on a journey to find 1,000 different things that she was thankful for in a year. Just kept writing them down, and then her book just got longer and longer. She says, gratitude always dissipates fearfulness. Gratitude takes away fearfulness. And daily thankfulness gives you eyes to really see. And following on from that, number 6, healthy eyes. The verses about the eyes go on to say, verse 23, if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. We need to protect our eyes. An example for you, I really love social media. I think it's a great tool for communicating, for being creative, for building community, and it's just as well because it's part of my job here, and if you do use social media, follow the church, that would be great. But there's a side of it that can be really unhelpful and unhealthy, and we need boundaries in place. I've found that if I linger just for a few seconds on some sort of miracle forehead smoothing serum, that within seconds, every ad that I see is to do with skincare and trying to encourage me to spend more money on skincare. I don't need any encouragement to spend more money on skincare. They know this. They know that they've got seconds to convince you that you need something else in your life. And so we're bombarded with it. And we need to take care of our eyes and protect what they see. John is particularly passionate about this. For ages in our house, we had no adverts. If the adverts came on, they went off. But now that the kids are getting a bit older, we're trying to teach them what the advert's saying. So he'll be like, what's it actually saying to you? And because so often it's saying, you don't have enough, or you'd be better if you had this, or this is missing from your life. And these are lies, and we need to call them out as lies. Watch what we watch. Number 7, don't worry. Again, easy for me to say, but that's what Jesus said. We're commanded not to worry. And worry is defined as a sense of anxiety or uneasiness about the future. It's fear. And the Bible tells us so many times not to be afraid. Worry is the time and space that we give to those feelings of fear. And I think Jesus says don't worry about money because that's not where we should be investing our time and space, our brain energy. That's not where it should be. Because the final one, and the most important one, is number 8. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. Everything falls into place when we seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. I was thinking about this one this week and just thinking, if only I could pursue as much, I could spend as much time pursuing righteousness as I do thinking about my next holiday or my bank balance or my next purchase or whether or not I can afford this or that. Man, if that time and energy went into pursuing righteousness, what could that do? I so want God's kingdom to be the thing I'm thinking of more than anything else. I heard an analogy just this week. If you knew that our currency as a country was changing, and it's a sure thing, it's coming up, we're changing, we're leaving the pound, we're going to something different. I'm not going to put out there what, because that might be too political for you this morning. But what would you do with your money? Well, you might keep a little bit of it to see you through, but you'd take the bulk of it and you'd exchange it, you'd be ready. Friends, our currency has changed. We are citizens of heaven. We pray, your kingdom come, your will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. That's our family prayer. We're citizens of heaven, and our currency has changed. That's our future inheritance, but it's what we should be investing in right now. Let's exchange as much of that as possible for our future investment. Seek first his kingdom. I'm going to ask the band to come up. I phoned my mum and dad, not knowing that I was going to see my dad this morning. I phoned my mum and dad earlier this week to ask their permission to share their story and I wanted to clarify some of the details. And it was an emotional conversation because we were just thinking how good God's been. But Dad shared with me this poem that was important to them at the time when they were giving up their jobs. And it's written by Bill McChesney, who was a young missionary. And Bill was sadly killed serving the Lord in the Congo in the 1960s. So the poem's a little bit dated in language, but will you bear with it because I think it's got a really beautiful message for us this morning. And then we'll spend some time responding to the Lord in worship. It's called My Choice. I want my breakfast served at 8 with ham and eggs upon the plate. A well-broiled steak I'll eat at 1 and dine again when day is done. I want an ultra-modern home and in each room a telephone, soft carpets too upon the floors and pretty drapes to grace the doors. A cozy place of lovely things like easy chairs with inner springs. And then I'll get a small TV, but of course I'm careful what I see. I want my wardrobe too to be of neatest, finest quality with latest style in suit and vest. Why shouldn't Christians have the best? But then the Master I can hear, in no uncertain voice so clear, I bid you, come and follow me, the lowly man of Galilee. Birds of the air have made their nest, and foxes in their holes find rest. But I can offer you no bed, no place have I to lay my head. In shame I hung my head and cried, how could I spurn the crucified? Could I forget the way he went? The sleepless nights in prayer he spent. For 40 days without a bite, alone he fasted day and night. Despised, rejected, on he went, and did not stop till veil was rent. A man of sorrows and of grief, no earthly friend to bring relief. Smitten of God, the prophet said, mocked, beaten, bruised, his blood ran red. If he be God and died for me, no sacrifice too great can be for me, a mortal man to make. I'll do it all for Jesus' sake. Yes, I will tread the path he trod. No other way will please my God. So henceforth, this my choice shall be, my choice for all eternity.